A few years ago, a friend of mine texted me telling me that I needed to listen to the cast recording of an off Broadway play based on the myths of Persephone and Orpheus. And I didn't do it. For several months at least. I did eventually get around to it and immediately loved it. Right as the album ended, I restarted it and listened to it repeatedly over the next year, really. That play was Hadestown, and I fell in love. But that was before the show had opened up on Broadway, and now it has, and I've seen it. So let's talk about Hadestown on Broadway. Now, fair warning, I'm not going to be talking about any specific plot points in this, but I am going to be talking about elements of the show that you might not want spoiled, especially if you're going to be able to see this on Broadway or on tour. And I'm not a theater guy. I like the theater, I like musicals, but it isn't my background. Take everything I say as someone who really appreciates this work as a piece of art and someone who enjoys the mythological context of it. Just a quick summary for those of you who are not aware of what Hadestown is. It recontextualizes two myths, the myth of the mythical musician Orpheus and that of the goddess of spring Persephone, both of which involve going down to the underworld, to Hades. And it sets it in a kind of Depression era setting with hell being an industrial metropolis where the people go there and work themselves, not to death because they're already dead, but presumably to death. And the way to get there is on a railroad line. Orpheus falls in love with a woman named Eurydice who dies and goes down to Hadestown. And this romance is contrasted with the romance of the older gods, Persephone and Hades, who, when they were younger, at least in this version, consensually got together, and but as time has gone on, their relationship has soured. Of course, in the myth, it wasn't consensual. Consent wasn't a big thing in ancient Greece. The musical has a lot going on about it. The themes I connect to most are those of this story being a cycle, of it being a story told over and over again. Obviously, these are myths, which have been told over and over again, and are continued to be told into the modern day, despite the culture that they are from no longer existing. And all this is framed in a meta-narrative in the story, where the god Hermes is telling you the story again, hoping this time it will turn out well. And he does this again and again. And then in just the process of this being a play that is performed again and again every night. It's a continual series of cycles that's even reflected in the stage design, which is circles that rotate around each other. However, there are also themes about climate change, about some socioeconomic things that we have to deal with in the modern day, about capitalism, both back in the Depression and now. There's a lot of stuff you can read into this. It never lets these themes get big enough to sacrifice the narrative of the story. The musical is sung through, which means that the primary way of understanding the narrative is, of course, through the music and the lyrics. This is the third incarnation of this concept. It began as a concept album, then went to the off-Broadway, and now here on Broadway they have kind of mixed together some of the missing things from the concept album into the off-Broadway version and then added some stuff. The songs Flowers and Wedding Song, both brought over from the concept album, really flesh out the character of Eurydice, who is probably the most simplistic character in the off-Broadway version. In general, this version does a lot to emphasize the narrative, giving a little bit more expositionary dialogue and giving a lot more of the lyrics to Hermes, who serves as our narrator. All of this makes it more easy to follow and more suited for the stage. The agency of Orpheus is really interesting. It has a lot more focus on him discovering this song that he's working on. And it changes up how the audience perceives him, or at least how I perceived him. He seems a lot younger and more naive in this version, which contrasts him with Hades and Eurydice, This is also emphasized with Hermes being older. Hermes is a father figure to Orpheus in this version, which makes sense because they cast Andre de Shields, who is a veteran of Broadway and a very commanding presence. Hermes being old is also an interesting change mythologically because he's usually the younger person. It kind of adds this idea of this is the late days of the gods. Hermes is no longer the young trickster messenger. He's an older man who's looking over the son of a muse. The rest of the cast was really good as well. Amber Gray as Persephone is probably the standout. I believe that this play hinges on who plays Persephone. She brings so much life and vitality to it. Gray's performance was very physical in this very dynamic way. Whenever she was on stage, I found my eye drifting over just to see what she was doing. There's a part during the song Build the Wall, which she is not a central figure in, but she just has such this slack, soulless expression on her face because she is now returned to the underworld where there really isn't anything for her. And Patrick Page as Hades is amazing. His bass resonates throughout the theater, and he is both imposing and sympathetic. But I think the real standout part of this play is the staging. Like I said before, the stage circles around. In the center is a platform that raises and lowers, obviously used to send people down to the underworld. But around it are two concentric circles, and they use that to convey the geography of the space and movement when characters are unable to move, which characters are across from each other. The band is also on stage with the performers, which means that they get to interact with them, and it adds to both the meta-narrative of this being a story that's told, but also to the environment and aesthetic of this older, more Depression-era world. All in all, this is a musical where every single element is thought through. It's thought how it connects to the other ones and elevates the story as a whole. It's a project I'm really glad I got to see, and I feel like this is a proper culmination of what Anais Mitchell has been working on for so long. Personally, I think that if you're going to introduce yourself to Hadestown, you should still go with the off-Broadway cast recording. I feel like there are some flourishes in this version which probably don't lend themselves too well if you don't know what's going on stage. However, if you are lucky enough to be able to see this either now or when it's touring, I definitely would recommend it. Or, of course, if they put up a recording of it on YouTube or Netflix or wherever they put up those recordings. Like I said, I don't know a ton about the world of theater. Thank you so much for hearing me ramble about Hadestown and the experience. It was something that I was really excited about and loved a lot and was equally excited to share about with y'all. So I will see you tomorrow for another thing that I did in New York, mythology related.